You're being dramatic again, my sister said, not looking up from her phone. Kids get sick all the time. You just like the attention. My son was in the hospital bed behind me, tubes running into his small arm, and my sister stood in the hallway telling me I liked the attention. I didn't scream. I didn't have the energy left to scream. I just looked at her and walked back into the room where my son needed me more than I needed to be believed. 4 years later, standing at a podium in a ballroom full of the same family who never believed me, I finally understood why some truths take exactly as long as they need to arrive. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted, hit the like button now. If you've ever stayed silent while someone underestimated you, comment here below. And subscribe to Story Retribution because today's ending proves that karma always arrives, just not when people expect it. My son Caleb was diagnosed with a rare autoimmune condition when he was 6 years old, something called Castleman-adjacent vasculitis, a name I'd never heard before, and one that most of the doctors we saw over the following years had barely encountered themselves. It affected maybe a few hundred children in the entire country at any given time. It attacked his organs slowly, unpredictably, requiring specialists most local hospitals didn't even have on staff, requiring travel, requiring money we didn't have, requiring a level of exhausting advocacy I never knew I was capable of until I had no other choice. I was a single mother by then, divorced 2 years earlier, working as a hospital administrative assistant, ironically surrounded by medical professionals every day while fighting for my own son's care to be taken seriously. My family, my parents, my 2 siblings, lived nearby, and I desperately needed their support during those years. What I got instead was suspicion. My younger sister Danielle was the worst of it. Danielle had always struggled with feeling overshadowed growing up, convinced our parents favored me, convinced every hardship in my life was somehow secretly a bid for sympathy or attention. When Caleb first got sick, she offered polite, distant concern for about 2 weeks before her tone shifted entirely. The small betrayal happened about 3 months into Caleb's diagnosis, at a family dinner where I mentioned needing to travel out of state for a specialist consultation Caleb's local doctors couldn't provide. Danielle rolled her eyes. Every week it's something new with him, she said. Maybe if you stopped running to every specialist you find online, he'd actually just get better on his own. Kids are resilient. I explained again, patiently, exhausted, that Castleman-adjacent vasculitis wasn't something that resolved on its own, that it required exactly the kind of specialized care she was mocking me for pursuing. She waved me off, unconvinced, already scrolling through her phone. The bigger betrayal deepened over the following 2 years, as Caleb's condition worsened despite treatment, requiring longer hospital stays, more aggressive interventions, and mounting medical debt that eventually forced me to set up a fundraising page, something I hated doing but had no other option left. Danielle saw the fundraiser and called me directly, furious. "Do you know how embarrassing this is for the family?" she said. "Asking strangers for money like this? People are starting to ask me questions, and I don't know what to tell them because, honestly, I don't even know if any of this is real anymore." I remember standing in the hospital parking garage during that call, exhausted from a sleepless week at Caleb's bedside, and something inside me went very quiet and very cold. "He has feeding tubes, Danielle," I said. "He's had 4 surgeries. I have his medical records if you'd genuinely like to see them instead of accusing me of lying about my own child's illness." She never asked to see them. She simply said, "You're being dramatic again," and hung up. My parents, caught in the middle, offered small, hesitant support at times, but never enough to counter Danielle's persistent narrative that I was somehow exaggerating, somehow performing tragedy for sympathy and financial gain. My older brother stayed mostly silent, uncomfortable with confrontation, choosing distance over involvement. I stopped expecting anything from them. I focused entirely on Caleb, on specialists, on treatments, on the small, precious good days scattered between the difficult ones, on teaching him to laugh even through hospital stays, on being the parent he needed regardless of who believed me. Caleb passed away when he was 10 years old, 4 years after his diagnosis, his body finally unable to withstand another round of treatment. I won't describe those final weeks. Some things are too heavy to relive out loud, even now, even for a story that needs telling. At his funeral, Danielle showed up briefly, said something vague and uncomfortable about Such a shame, and left before the service even fully concluded, citing a work commitment. My parents stayed the full service, but seemed unable to fully process the reality of what had happened, perhaps because some part of them had spent years quietly believing Danielle's version of events over mine. I grieved largely alone. I buried my son largely alone, surrounded by hospital staff and two close friends who had actually shown up consistently over 4 exhausting years, rather than the family who was supposed to. The silent preparation that followed wasn't revenge. I want to be clear about that. What I built over the following 3 years wasn't designed to punish anyone. It was designed to make sure Caleb's life and his death meant something beyond the isolation and disbelief that defined so much of his final years. I started a foundation in his name, the Caleb Reyes Foundation, dedicated to funding research and family support services specifically for children diagnosed with rare autoimmune conditions, like the one that took him. I used the settlement from the medical malpractice case I'd eventually pursued against the first hospital that had dismissed his symptoms as growing pains for nearly a year before an actual diagnosis was made, funneling every dollar into research grants and travel assistance for families navigating exactly what I had navigated completely alone. Over 3 years, the foundation grew slowly but steadily, eventually funding a specialized research partnership with one of the only pediatric autoimmune centers in the country equipped to treat conditions like Caleb's, the same center that had ultimately, tragically too late, given him his final months of relative stability. I never discussed the foundation extensively with my family. Danielle occasionally saw mentions of it on social media, and according to my mother, made passing comments about how I was still doing the attention thing, just with a nonprofit now. I let those comments pass through me without much reaction anymore. Grief had reshaped what mattered to me, and Danielle's opinion had stopped being one of those things a long time ago. The public reveal happened 4 years after Caleb's death, at an annual charity gala the foundation hosted to fund the following year's research grants. My family, through a complicated series of professional connections neither Danielle nor I had anticipated, ended up on the guest list. Danielle's husband worked for a corporate sponsor that had recently begun contributing to pediatric health causes, and their attendance had been arranged before anyone realized whose foundation the gala actually belonged to. Danielle arrived looking uncomfortable the moment she recognized Caleb's photograph on the welcome banner, clearly not having connected the foundation's name to see before that exact moment. I found her near the reception table, her husband beside her, both looking distinctly out of place among the doctors, researchers, and grieving families who made up most of the gala's genuine attendees. "I didn't realize this was your foundation," Danielle said stiffly, avoiding my eyes. "It's been 4 years," I said quietly. "I've mentioned it before." She said nothing, glancing uncomfortably at Caleb's photograph again. I decided not to make a scene. I hadn't built this evening to humiliate my sister. I'd built it to honor my son. But then Danielle's husband, trying to fill the awkward silence, mentioned something that changed the entire trajectory of the evening. "Actually," he said, "we're here partly because our daughter's pediatrician mentioned this foundation last month. She's been having some strange symptoms lately. Fatigue, joint pain, some swelling doctors haven't been able to fully explain yet." Danielle's face went pale. "What symptoms exactly?" I asked, my voice steady despite everything suddenly tightening in my chest. Her husband described them, hesitant, clearly unaware of the significance of what he was saying. The symptoms he described were, disturbingly, almost identical to Caleb's earliest presentation, 4 years before his official diagnosis. "Wait, what?" Danielle whispered, staring at her husband, then at me, the color completely gone from her face. "When did this start?" I asked gently, setting aside every ounce of old resentment in favor of the urgency I recognized instantly, having lived through exactly this moment myself years earlier. "About 2 months ago," Danielle said, her voice shaking now. "Her regular doctor keeps saying it's probably just growing pains, but it's not getting better." I felt something complicated move through me, grief, old anger, and underneath all of it, an instinct I couldn't override even after everything. A mother's fear for a child, any child, recognizing symptoms that had once cost me everything. "Danielle," I said quietly, "I need you to listen to me very carefully right now." She nodded, tears already forming. "The center your daughter's pediatrician mentioned, the one connected to this foundation, is one of maybe 4 facilities in the entire country equipped to properly diagnose conditions like this quickly, I said. I can get you an expedited consultation. Tomorrow, if needed. Danielle broke down completely, right there near the reception table, years of dismissiveness collapsing under the weight of sudden personal fear. I'm so sorry, she said through tears. I never believed you. I told everyone you were exaggerating, and She stopped, unable to continue. I didn't offer easy forgiveness in that moment. I want to be honest about that. 4 years of grief and isolation don't dissolve instantly, even in a moment like this one. But I also didn't let my own pain stand between a child and the care she urgently needed. I'll make the calls tonight, I said. Your daughter deserves better than what Caleb got. Nobody should have to wait years for people to believe them. The family reactions unfolded slowly over the following weeks. Danielle's daughter was seen by specialists within days, and though her condition turned out to be different from Caleb's, related but distinct, requiring its own careful treatment path, catching it early made an enormous difference that doctors confirmed repeatedly throughout her treatment. My parents, learning the full story months later, finally seemed to fully absorb the weight of what I'd carried largely alone for years, apologizing in ways that felt both overdue and eventually genuinely meaningful. Danielle and I didn't return to what we'd been before Caleb's illness, because that relationship built on dismissal and disbelief was never something worth returning to, but something new, slower and more honest began forming instead, built on an understanding that grief and fear can teach lessons that comfort and distance never could. The emotional resolution settled over me gradually, watching Danielle's daughter recover steadily over the following year, watching my sister finally understand, in the most painful way possible, exactly what I had lived through completely alone. I didn't feel triumphant. I never wanted this kind of vindication, the kind that only arrives through someone else's fear. I felt something far more complicated. Grief for my son threaded permanently through relief for my niece, anger at years of dismissal now inseparable from whatever fragile understanding was beginning to form. The final lesson settled over me months later, sitting beside Caleb's photograph at the foundation office, surrounded by research updates from families whose children were finally getting diagnosed faster, treated earlier, believed sooner, because of work built entirely from my son's absence. Danielle had spent years assuming my exhaustion, my desperate advocacy, my quiet persistence through impossible years were performances rather than survival. She mistook a mother's love for attention-seeking, mistook grief for exaggeration, never imagining that the sister she dismissed so easily would eventually build something significant enough to catch her own daughter's illness before it became what Caleb's became. I never raised my voice at that gala. I never listed every dismissive comment from 4 devastating years. I let one foundation, built entirely from love and loss, do what years of pleading with my own family never could: prove undeniably exactly what had always been true. Karma doesn't announce itself with anger. Sometimes it doesn't announce itself as karma at all. Sometimes it simply arrives as an open hand extended towards someone who never extended one to you, because some lessons matter more than being right, and some love outlasts even the people who never believed in it. If this story resonated with you, hit that like button right now. Tell me in the comments, what would you have done in my situation? If you enjoy stories about family betrayal, emotional drama, shocking revenge, and the justice that always finds its way back, subscribe to Story Retribution and turn on the bell so you never miss the next story. Tomorrow's story might be even more unbelievable. See you then.